My name is Hannah. I was 38 years old the day my world shattered with a single text message. It came in the middle of an ordinary afternoon at my boutique. I was wrapping scarves for a loyal customer when my phone buzzed. I glanced down and froze. I'm leaving you. I'm moving to Miami with my 20-year-old girlfriend. I already emptied our joint account. Haha. The words didn't even sting at first. They burned, like acid searing through everything I thought I knew about my life. Yet my hands didn't shake, my voice didn't break. I still smiled politely at Mrs. Peterson as she admired the silver wrapping paper. I didn't let her see that my marriage of 12 years had just been destroyed by a cruel text. When the door closed behind her, silence pressed around me. I stared at the screen. The laughter at the end of his message, haha, cut deeper than any blade. This wasn't just betrayal, it was mockery. It was my husband Mark believing he had broken me. But he hadn't. Because what Mark never understood was that strength isn't loud. Strength is quiet. It's the tightening around your eyes when you refuse to collapse. It's the decision to breathe steadily when someone wants you to choke. He thought I'd crumble. Instead, I calmly locked the boutique door and began turning the key on a chapter of my life I had prepared for more carefully than he could ever imagine. As I stood in the stillness, memories of the last few months flooded me. The late nights he claimed were for work, the sudden obsession with the gym, the shirts too tight for his softening body, the way he smiled at his phone like a teenager hiding a secret. All the signs were there flashing like warning lights on a dark highway, and I had paid attention. Mark thought his text was the first move. In truth, it was the last. I remember pouring myself a glass of water, sipping slowly, letting the cold steadiness ground me. If he wanted me broken, he would never get the satisfaction. I was not the woman he could humiliate with a few cruel sentences. I was the woman who built this boutique from nothing, who balanced ledgers at midnight, who had already mapped her escape the night she found a dinner receipt for two tucked inside his jacket pocket. That night I had made a vow. If he ever tried to betray me, I would not just survive. I would outlast him. And now, here it was the moment. Delivered not in person, not with honesty or dignity, but by the glow of a phone screen. That was who Mark had become. A coward in designer jeans chasing youth he could never hold, thinking cruelty made him powerful. I picked up my phone again. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. My response was only 2 words. Good luck. Simple. Final. A phrase that said everything without revealing anything. I wanted him to believe he had won. That illusion would be my shield. Because while Mark was busy laughing with his 20-year-old receptionist, I was about to show him what real preparation looked like. Oh, that was the beginning. A single text, a single choice. Not to collapse, but to rise. And if you've ever been underestimated, if someone has ever thought they could write your ending for you, then you'll understand why I kept breathing, why I kept moving, why I refused to let one man's betrayal define the story of my life. This was not the end. It was the hook, the first crack in a dam about to break. I locked the boutique door behind me that evening, and for the first time in 12 years I felt an odd kind of freedom pressing against my chest. The text message had been brutal, yes, but it also confirmed what I had known for months. Mark was gone, at least the version of him I once loved. He had traded vows for vanity, loyalty, for lust and dignity, for a 20-year-old receptionist who laughed too loudly at his jokes. As I walked through the quiet shop, I touched the glass counters and the shelves lined with scarves, handbags, and dresses. This little boutique, once mocked as my hobby, had become the backbone of my life. It was steady, reliable, and built on discipline and grit. Everything Mark was not. I picked up my phone again. More messages had come. Don't bother begging, he wrote. Melissa and I leave tomorrow. I'll send for my things later. Melissa, the same girl I had met at the Christmas party, the one who clung to his arm when she thought no one was watching. Young enough to be his daughter, foolish enough to believe she was special. The irony made me smile. I didn't respond. Instead, I scrolled to a different number and pressed call. My lawyer answered on the second ring. Hannah, is it time? Yes, I said calmly, it's time. The truth was, I had been waiting for this moment. 2 months earlier, when I discovered hotel charges on our joint credit card, I sat in this same office with stacks of bank statements spread across my desk. That day, I hired her. I told her to prepare the paperwork. Because I wasn't going to be blindsided by a man who had already checked out of our marriage. Now he had made his move, and I was ready. "Do you want me to have him served in Miami?" she asked. "No rush," I replied. "Let him think he's won first." That's what Mark never understood. Real power comes from patience. It comes from silence that conceals strength. He believed his betrayal was a clever escape, but in truth it was a trap he had set for himself, and I had simply been waiting for him to walk into it. My phone buzzed again, another text. "I know this must be hard for you. You're not getting any younger after all. At least you have your little shop to keep you busy." My little shop, the one that generated more income than his middle management job. The one that had allowed me to save in secret. The one he never respected enough to consider a threat. That night I opened a bottle of wine I had been saving for a special occasion. It felt like the right moment. Not to mourn, but to celebrate the first step of my escape from a man who thought cruelty equaled power. I walked through the house, my house. The deed had always been in my name, a gift from my grandmother protected from Mark's grasping hands. He had suggested countless times that we add his name to it, but I never agreed. Something inside me always whispered not to. Now I understood why. As I set the paperwork out on the dining table, the weight of what was coming settled around me. Mark thought he was starting a new life, but the only life that was about to collapse was his own. And here's the truth I want to share with you, because maybe you've been underestimated too. Sometimes the greatest act of power is refusing to fall apart when someone wants to see you broken. It's standing steady, smiling, when they expect tears, planning when they think you're helpless. Before I go on with the rest of my story, I want to pause and ask you something. Have you ever faced betrayal that tried to define you, but instead pushed you to rise stronger? If you have, share it in the comments below. And if my story speaks to you so far, hit subscribe. Because I promise what comes next will show just how powerful preparation can be. That night, I sat in the quiet, sipping wine, flipping through our wedding album. Mark looked different back then, before the gym memberships, the expensive shirts, and the desperate slang he used to cling to youth. He was just a man I once trusted. That man was gone. All that remained was someone chasing illusions. And as I closed the album, I realized something simple, yet profound. The worst betrayal often carries within it the seed of our freedom. Mark had texted me thinking he ended my story. He was wrong. He had just set it in motion. Wait. The next morning would bring a flood of new texts, new threats, new revelations, and with every one, his downfall would grow sharper. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the boutique windows as I brewed a cup of coffee. My phone buzzed endlessly with Mark's texts. His words jumped between arrogance and mockery. "I've been planning this for months. Melissa understands me in ways you never could. You'll be fine. Maybe you'll find someone more your own age." Every sentence was another stone he thought he was stacking on my grave. But really, he was laying the foundation of his own. I sipped my coffee slowly, almost amused. Because the signs had been there long before that cruel message. Looking back, they were as clear as neon lights. And I wanted to tell you about them, not because I enjoy reliving his betrayal, but because they were the breadcrumbs that led me to prepare for this moment. It started with late nights. Mark claimed he was working overtime, yet the deposits in our bank account never reflected the hours he supposedly logged. When I questioned him, he brushed me off with vague excuses. "The project budget hasn't cleared yet. I'll get reimbursed next month." Lies layered on lies. Then came the sudden obsession with his appearance. He signed up for a gym membership, bought designer clothes far too tight for his frame. He started using slang that made him sound like a teenager. I remember cringing when he said YOLO at dinner one night, as if he could rewind time just by parroting the words of people 20 years younger. And then the receipts, the most telling clue of all. 3 months ago, I reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. Dinner for 2, a fancy steakhouse. On the exact night he had told me he was working late. That receipt changed everything. I didn't cry. I didn't confront him with rage. I simply sat at my desk, opened a new bank account under my name, and began transferring my savings. I also started keeping meticulous records, copies of statements, screenshots of texts, photographs of receipts. I wasn't preparing for a fight. I was preparing for survival. Mark never noticed. He was too consumed with the thrill of deception, too distracted by a receptionist half his age who mistook flattery for love. One evening when he suggested we combine all our accounts to simplify things, I smiled sweetly and agreed. He had no idea that my real money had already been moved. The account he later emptied only held 2 months of deposits, enough to keep him unsuspecting, enough rope for him to hang himself. That is what betrayal does, it blinds people. Mark thought he was clever. He thought he was untouchable. But while he plotted hotel getaways and whispered sweet nothings into Melissa's ear, I was quietly building my defense. And maybe that's the first lesson in all of this. Preparation is power. Betrayal hurts, yes. But foresight is the weapon that transforms pain into resilience. Sometimes I wonder if you were in my shoes, would you have noticed the signs sooner? Or would you have believed the excuses, the late nights, the sudden gym trips? Tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you found that dinner receipt in your partner's jacket? Because that single slip of paper told me the truth. It told me my marriage was already over. From that day, I lived with 2 versions of myself. The outward wife smiling, nodding, playing the role, and the inward strategist, gathering evidence, protecting assets, planning for the inevitable. Mark's betrayal didn't begin with a text. It began with every little choice he made to distance himself from our life together. And instead of chasing after him, I learned to chase after something else: security, independence, clarity. As I sorted the receipts one night, I remember whispering to myself, he thinks he's writing this story, but he has no idea I hold the pen. And when his final text came, the one meant to break me, I already had everything in place. Accounts secured, assets protected, evidence documented, a lawyer on standby. Mark believed the game had just begun, but the truth was it was already over. The stage was set, and soon he would realize that betrayal might feel like triumph in the moment, but it rarely ends the way betrayers imagine. I remember that night as if it were yesterday. I sat alone at my dining table, stacks of papers spread before me like pieces on a chessboard. Bank statements, credit card records, photographs of receipts tucked away in folders. To anyone else, it might have looked obsessive. To me, it was survival. Because 3 months earlier, when I discovered that dinner receipt, I knew something had snapped in my marriage. I didn't scream. I didn't throw plates. I simply opened a new account at a different bank and moved my savings there. From that moment on, I played a part. Outwardly, I was the patient wife, tolerating late nights and flimsy excuses. Inwardly, I was an architect building an exit plan. Mark thought he was orchestrating a grand escape. He had no idea that I was always 2 steps ahead. When he suggested we combine our finances to simplify things, I smiled and nodded. He must have thought I was gullible, that I didn't see through the act. What he didn't know was that I had already safeguarded my money. The joint account he later emptied contained only enough to keep him unsuspecting, just 2 months of deposits. Enough bait for him to believe he was draining me dry. I also contacted a lawyer the week I found hotel charges on our shared credit card. I remember sitting in her office, telling her everything in a calm, steady voice. She looked at me and said, "You're doing the right thing. Preparation now will protect you later." That sentence replayed in my head every time Mark tried to charm me, every time he smiled like nothing was wrong. So when the cruel text came, his so-called victory speech, it wasn't shock I felt. It was confirmation. It was the final move I had been waiting for him to make. That night, I pulled out the file where I kept every screenshot, every receipt, every line item that smelled of betrayal. I labeled it evidence. It was thick enough to crush any of his lies. He thought he was clever. He thought he was free. But I held the truth in black and white. And here's the part he never understood. I didn't need revenge to survive. I needed boundaries. I needed clarity. I needed to protect what was mine so that he could never take it away. He mocked me for being cautious. He laughed at my bookkeeping habits, calling them paranoid. He teased me about separating the boutique finances from our household account, saying I didn't trust him. He was right, I didn't, and thank God I didn't. Because every dollar I kept separate was a dollar he couldn't touch. Every record I documented was a weapon I could use in court. And every step I took in silence was one more reason his betrayal would collapse on itself. That evening, as I looked around my home, I felt gratitude for instincts I couldn't explain. My grandmother had left me the deed to this house, and though Mark pushed again and again to add his name, I never did. Something in me always resisted. Now I knew why. I poured another glass of wine, letting the warmth of it calm me. The house was quiet, almost serene despite the storm raging through my phone. His messages kept buzzing, mocking me, taunting me, promising a brighter life with Melissa. I ignored them. Instead, I carefully arranged the papers for my lawyer, binding them with clips, stacking them neatly, as if preparing a presentation. Because that was what this was. Not just a divorce, not just betrayal. This was a case, a trial, a chance to prove in front of a judge that cruelty has consequences. Mark thought he was starting a new chapter, but in truth, he had just walked into mine. Sometimes I wonder if he ever suspected. Did he ever notice the way I watched him, the way I never asked too many questions? Did he mistake my silence for submission, never realizing it was strategy? That's the power of quiet preparation. It looks like weakness until it explodes into strength. And as I turned off the lights that night, I whispered something to myself. Words that would carry me through the battles ahead. He thinks he's ahead, but I've already won. The next day, he would make his biggest mistake yet. And that mistake would show the world exactly who he had become and exactly how prepared I was to bring it all crashing down. The following morning, I awoke to the relentless buzzing of my phone. Mark's messages came one after another each, more condescending than the last. But one of them made me pause. By the way, I used the joint card to book our flights and hotel. Consider it my parting gift, LOL. I stared at the words, almost laughing out loud myself. Did he really think he was untouchable? Did he think that bragging about stealing from me would go unnoticed? This was the mistake I had been waiting for. His arrogance had crossed a line into recklessness. He had left a written confession of fraud, a breadcrumb trail I could hand directly to the credit card company and the court. I dialed the number on the back of the card. A calm voice answered. Mrs. Harrison, how can I help you today? Yes, I replied, steady and clear. I need to report fraudulent charges. 2 first-class tickets to Miami and a hotel reservation at the Royal Palm, both booked today. Do you have documentation? She asked. I do, I said, scrolling to his text. My husband admitted he used our joint account to fund a trip with his girlfriend after draining our shared savings. There was a pause, then a soft shift in her voice. Professional, but almost triumphant. We'll cancel the charges immediately, and we'll be removing your husband as an authorized user. I hung up, exhaling slowly. Just like that, his fantasy of Miami sunshine was erased. Tomorrow, he and Melissa would stand at the airport with worthless tickets, their hotel reservation void, their grand escape collapsing before it began. I imagined the scene. Mark's smug grin fading as the airline clerk shook her head. Melissa clutching her phone in confusion. The humiliation, the panic, the realization that his clean break was nothing more than a stumble into disaster. And I didn't even need to lift a finger beyond forwarding a screenshot. Sometimes the best revenge is letting someone destroy themselves. That afternoon, as I folded new arrivals at the boutique, my phone buzzed again. This time, Mark was furious. What did you do to our card? The airline won't honor our tickets. The hotel canceled everything. Answer me now. I silenced the phone and kept working. Friday was always my busiest day. Customers streamed in, admiring the handbags, complimenting the displays. Life didn't stop just because my husband tried to run off with someone who barely knew him. In fact, life seemed clearer, brighter, almost energized by the truth finally breaking into the open. That night I poured another glass of wine and stood at the window, my house, my sanctuary, my fortress. Mark had no claim to it no matter how loudly he protested, and soon the court would see it the same way. But what struck me most wasn't the victory itself, it was the lesson. Arrogance blinds people. Mark believed he could mock me, drain our account, flaunt a young girlfriend, and still walk away clean. He never imagined that the woman he dismissed as getting older was the same woman who had built a stronger life than he ever could. And if you're listening to this, I want you to hear me clearly. Never underestimate the quiet preparation of someone who has been wronged. And if my story resonates with you, take a second to subscribe. Because this isn't just about betrayal, it's about reclaiming power, and I want you to walk with me through the rest of it. The following morning brought more than angry texts. It brought calls from his family. His mother's voice quivered through the phone. "Claire, dear, Mark told us everything. He said you've been controlling. He said you're being vindictive, sabotaging his travel plans." I placed the call on speaker while arranging a window display. Did he mention emptying our joint account? Did he mention charging first-class tickets for him and Melissa? Silence, then a shaky reply. "Well, he said you left him no choice, that you'd been cold and distant." I picked up one of the texts and read it aloud. "Would you like me to forward you the one where he mocks my age, or the one where he admits to draining our money?" Her voice faltered. I told him that text was inappropriate. "Barbara," I said softly, "I've always liked you. But my lawyer advised minimal contact with Mark's family, so this will be our last conversation." I ended the call. For the first time in years, I felt no guilt, only clarity, his choices, his cruelty, his downfall. None of it was mine to carry anymore. As I turned the boutique sign to closed, I realized something powerful. His mistakes weren't destroying me, they were setting me free. And soon the courtroom would echo with the truth I had been gathering in silence. That weekend, as Mark and Melissa scrambled at the airport, furious over canceled tickets and voided hotel reservations, I walked calmly through the rooms of my house. My house. The deed bore only my name, a legacy from my grandmother who had believed in protecting what was hers. When Mark and I first married, he had pressed me many times to add his name. "It'll make things simpler," he said. "Marriage means sharing everything." But something inside me had resisted. Call it instinct, call it foresight. Whatever it was, that choice became one of the wisest decisions I ever made. The walls held more than just memories. They held security. This was the place where I sketched my first boutique designs at the dining room table. The place where late nights were spent planning sales and inventory, while Mark mocked me saying, "It's just a little hobby." He never saw the long hours, the late deliveries, the steady climb from one client to 50, from a handful of scarves to a thriving boutique generating more revenue than his middle management job ever did. And now that little shop was my fortress. The boutique had always been incorporated under my name alone. I had kept its accounts completely separate against his complaints. Mark called me paranoid. He said I didn't trust him. And he was right. I didn't. I trusted the numbers, the contracts, the paperwork, all of which bore only my signature. He never lifted a finger to help. Yet now, in his arrogance, he would try to claim it as his. I could already imagine his outrage when the truth came out. When his lawyer realized the business was legally mine. When the court saw years of detailed records showing every penny I had invested. He thought walking away with Melissa meant walking away with half my world. He didn't realize he had no claim to any of it. That night I sat at the oak desk in my study, stacks of files neatly arranged for my lawyer. Copies of incorporation papers, tax records, proof of independent income. Each sheet of paper was like armor. Every number was a shield. Mark's texts kept buzzing through, but I barely glanced at them. I had bigger plans. I opened the wedding album again. The man in those pictures looked almost innocent, almost trustworthy. How different he was from the figure he had become, squeezing into shirts too tight, chasing youth like it was a prize he could buy with a gym membership and new cologne. I closed the book with finality. That man no longer existed. What remained was a stranger who had underestimated me. Sometimes people think strength comes from shouting, from slamming doors, from dramatic scenes. But the truth is, real strength can be quiet. It's keeping documents organized. It's refusing to put someone's name on a deed. It's working late in a boutique when everyone else is asleep. Quiet, persistent strength. Mark never recognized it. But the court would. I knew what was coming, and strangely I felt no fear, only clarity. This house, this business, this life, I had built them. I had protected them. And soon the world would see who truly held the power. I walked through the boutique the next morning, arranging a new shipment of handbags. Customers greeted me warmly. Business thrived. Outside, the world kept spinning. Inside, I felt a calm resolve. Because here's the lesson, one I want you to remember. If you've ever been dismissed or underestimated, your independence is your fortress. Guard it, protect it, even when others mock you for it. And if this story resonates with you, don't just listen, be part of it. Subscribe, stay connected, because I promise what's coming next will show just how much power preparation can give you. Mark thought he could strip me of everything. But as he sulked in some budget motel near the airport, I was living proof that foresight and independence are the sharpest weapons a person can wield. Hey, the battle wasn't over. Soon his family would step in, repeating his lies, trying to paint me as the villain. But they didn't know the evidence I held or how ready I was for their accusations. And when the day came to face him in court, even his relatives would see the truth. 2 days later, as I was setting up a new window display at the boutique, my phone rang. The caller ID read Barbara Mark's mother. I hesitated for a moment, then pressed answer and placed the call on speaker. Her voice came trembling through the line. "Hannah, dear, Mark told us everything. He says you've been controlling, that you pushed him away. He says you're sabotaging his travel plans, being vindictive." Vindictive. That word sat heavy in the air. I looked at the designer scarf in my hands, the one I was draping over a mannequin, and almost laughed. Here I was, working in the shop he dismissed as my hobby, and he was in a budget motel near the airport, already spinning tales for his family. "Barbara," I said calmly, "did he also tell you he emptied our joint account? Did he mention he used our shared credit card to buy tickets and a hotel for himself and Melissa?" Silence, then a hesitant, "Well, he said you left him no choice, that you'd been cold and distant for years." I picked up my phone, scrolling to the text messages he had so proudly sent me. "Would you like me to read them to you? The one where he bragged about draining our account, or the one where he mocked me for getting older?" Her voice faltered. I told him that text was inappropriate. "Barbara," I said softly, though my heart was steel, "I've always liked you. But my lawyer advised me to limit contact with Mark's family. This will be our last conversation. Goodbye." I ended the call. For the first time, I felt no guilt. I was done carrying the weight of his excuses, his justifications, his family's blind loyalty. This was his mess, not mine. By the afternoon, I heard from friends that Mark's sister Amanda was already spreading gossip. She claimed I had turned bitter, that I was trying to ruin Mark's new life with Melissa. But gossip has a way of circling back. Soon enough, they would all see the evidence for themselves. That night, I sat in my living room with a folder of documents on the coffee table. Bank statements, screenshots of his texts, hotel receipts, a record of every choice he made that betrayed our marriage. Each piece of paper was a weapon of truth. He could call me controlling, vindictive, cold, but the facts told another story. Sometimes I wonder, what would you have done in my place? If your spouse's family turned against you, believed lies, and accused you of being the villain, would you try to win them back? Or would you do what I did, cut ties and protect yourself? Tell me in the comments, because I'd love to hear your perspective. The truth is, family loyalty can be blinding. Barbara and Amanda wanted to believe Mark because it was easier than facing the reality of his cruelty. But denial doesn't erase evidence. And soon denial would meet a judge's gavel. The next day, my lawyer called with news. The emergency hearing is scheduled for Monday. Given his admission about emptying the joint account plus the credit card fraud, we're in a strong position to freeze the rest of his assets. I closed my eyes, relief washing through me. "Has he been served yet?" "Not yet," she replied, "but he will be at the motel address we confirmed. By then, he'll realize his Miami dreams are over." I smiled faintly. Mark had once accused me of being too methodical, too cautious. Yet it was those very qualities that now protected me. My instincts, my records, my boundaries. They were saving me from the chaos he had created. That weekend, Melissa's social media posts started surfacing. Photos of cheap takeout in a motel room, complaints about canceled plans, Snide remarks about me, the old wife who didn't know how to keep her man. But I didn't care. Every post was more evidence for the court. Every word proved that Mark's new love was as reckless as he was. I sat back in my chair looking around the house that was mine alone. He had mocked me, underestimated me, tried to paint me as the villain. But soon, in a courtroom full of witnesses, the truth would shine brighter than his lies. The family that defended him would have no choice but to face who he really was. And when they did, they would see that the woman they dismissed, the one they thought was fragile, was the only one who had been strong all along. Monday morning arrived sharp and cold, the kind of day when the air feels heavy with anticipation. I dressed carefully, choosing a dark suit that spoke of quiet authority, and carried the thick folder of documents I had prepared over the last several months. Each page was a nail in the coffin Mark had built for himself. When I entered the courthouse, my heels clicked against the marble floor, steady and measured. I saw him standing there fidgeting in his new young wardrobe. Designer jeans clung awkwardly to his middle-aged frame. A blazer far too flashy for the setting hung off his shoulders. And next to him, Melissa sat waiting, scrolling her phone, her youth glaring under the fluorescent lights. For a moment he looked up and smirked as if this were still a game he could win. But when his eyes landed on the folder in my hands, I saw the first flicker of unease. The judge entered. The courtroom hushed. My lawyer rose, first calm and collected, presenting the evidence with methodical precision. She started with the text messages, Mark's own words projected onto the courtroom screen. "I'm leaving you. I emptied the account. I used the joint card to book our flights." Every sentence landed like a hammer. His laughter in those messages, haha, sounded crueler, uglier when stripped of context and read aloud by a clerk. Mark's lawyer shifted nervously, trying to spin the story. "My client admits to rash decisions, but Mrs. Harrison's actions have been calculating and vindictive." Calculating, my lawyer shot back. "You mean prudent. My client protected her separate assets, kept meticulous records, and sought legal counsel months ago. That is not vindictive. That is wise business. She presented the deed to the house solely in my name. She showed the boutique's incorporation papers, tax records, bank accounts, each tied to me alone. She displayed receipts from the very hotel Mark had claimed as business travel, and his mocking messages about my age and my so-called little shop." The judge leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Mr. Harrison, do you deny emptying the joint account and using shared credit cards to fund a trip with your girlfriend?" Mark cleared his throat, his voice cracked. I was just trying to make a clean break. "By committing financial fraud," the judge interrupted sharply. The courtroom fell silent. Melissa shifted in her seat, looking suddenly very small. "My client is entitled to part of the business," his lawyer tried again. "It grew during the marriage." My lawyer didn't even flinch. The boutique was established before the marriage. Mrs. Harrison maintained strict separation of accounts throughout. We have documentation of every investment and sale. Mr. Harrison never contributed financially, emotionally, or physically to its operation. What he calls support, we call belittlement, documented in his own texts and social media posts, mocking her work as a hobby. Mark's face flushed crimson. The smirk was gone. He twisted his hands together, eyes darting toward the exit as if searching for a way out. Finally, the judge delivered his ruling. This court finds sufficient evidence of financial misconduct. All shared assets are frozen pending dissolution. Mr. Harrison is ordered to return funds removed from joint accounts within 24 hours. Mark stammered, "But that money's gone. We spent it on—" "Then I suggest you find a way to replace it," the judge cut him off coldly. The gavel struck. The sound echoed through the chamber like thunder. As I rose, my folder clasped to my chest, I glanced once more at Mark. His posture sagged. The man who mocked my age, who called my boutique insignificant, who laughed as he betrayed me now, sat like a scolded child, his fantasies stripped bare in public. Outside, the sunlight was blinding after the dimness of the courtroom. My heels tapped against the pavement, each step firm, final. Behind me, I heard Melissa's voice, low and sharp. "So what now, Mark? What about Miami?" I didn't stay to listen to his answer. It didn't matter. His dreams had collapsed. His lies had caught up with him. And me, I walked toward my car, stronger, freer than I had felt in years. The courtroom was only the beginning. His mask had fallen. Now the rest of the world would see the truth I had always known. Oh, because the real story wasn't just about betrayal. It was about boundaries, resilience, and the power of preparation. The courthouse doors closed behind me with a heavy thud, and for the first time in months, I could breathe without the weight of his lies pressing against my chest. Mark had walked into that room so sure of himself, so smug in his blazer and tight jeans, and walked out stripped of everything he thought he controlled. Yet, even as the judge's words echoed in my ears, return the funds within 24 hours, I knew this was far from over. Men like Mark never surrender quietly. They cling to their illusions until the very last shred of dignity is gone. And sure enough, my phone buzzed before I even reached my car. His messages flipped wildly between anger and manipulation. "You ruined everything. I never meant to hurt you. You'll regret being so vindictive. We can still work this out. That boutique would be nothing without me." I stared at the screen, almost laughing. Without him, the man who called it my hobby, the man who never contributed a single dollar, his desperation was bleeding through every word. I didn't respond. Instead, I screenshotted each message and filed it away. Evidence. More nails for his coffin. The next week confirmed what I already suspected: his life was unraveling faster than he could spin excuses. Melissa's social media posts grew darker. Gone were the beachy selfies and Miami hashtags. In their place were cryptic quotes about toxic relationships, lessons learned, heartbreak. She deleted photos of them together. By Thursday, her relationship status had quietly disappeared. Through the grapevine, I heard they were living in her cramped studio apartment, surviving on her receptionist's salary. The thrill of sneaking around in hotel rooms had turned into the reality of a 45-year-old man sulking on a thrift store couch. The age gap that once felt daring now looked pathetic under fluorescent kitchen lights. Meanwhile, my world was blooming. Business at the boutique surged. Customers came in not only to shop, but to show support. Some whispered that they'd heard about my situation and wanted to stand with me. Others laughed softly, confiding that their own exes had underestimated them, too. Every sale felt like a vote of confidence, every handshake like a declaration you are stronger than what tried to break you. And yet deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. Mark wasn't finished. He still had illusions left to shatter. He still believed he could claw something back, that he could twist the narrative to paint himself as the victim. I could feel it in my bones. Something bigger was coming. Sometimes in life, just when you think you've seen the worst, a new revelation surfaces. And in my case, what came next was even more shocking than his affair, more reckless than emptying our account, more humiliating than being thrown out of court. Because Mark was about to make a move so desperate, so short-sighted, that it would expose everything he had left to hide. Before I share that with you, let me pause here. If you've ever felt the ground shifting under your life, if you've ever known the calm before a storm, you'll understand this moment. And if you want to see just how far a man's downfall can go, stay with me. Subscribe now, because the next part of this story will show you how desperation doesn't just destroy it, devours. That day, as I locked the boutique for the evening, the air felt different, heavy, charged. I could sense something moving, like the moment before thunder cracks the sky. And when it came, I would be ready. It didn't take long for the cracks in Mark's new life to widen into canyons. Within days of the court hearing, word began to spread through mutual friends. Apparently, he had tried to use his personal credit cards to salvage the Miami trip after the joint account fiasco. But those cards had been maxed out for months. He stood at the airline counter, red-faced, arguing with the clerk, while Melissa shifted uncomfortably at his side. In the end, they left humiliated luggage in tow. Dreams of palm trees and cocktails reduced to a budget motel near the airport. I imagined the scene as I restocked handbags in my boutique, him fumbling for excuses, her realizing that her glamorous adventure was nothing more than smoke and mirrors. The irony was sharp. Mark had laughed at me for years, calling my boutique a silly little shop, while now it was his only steady reminder that I had planned and he had not. The fallout grew uglier each day. Melissa's social media rants hinted at cracks in their romance. She wrote about men who promise the world but can't even pay for dinner, about toxic partners who blame everyone else for their failures. Her friends chimed in, and soon Mark's name was whispered with ridicule. His family began to fracture too. Amanda, his sister, spread gossip, at first painting me as bitter vindictive. But when she saw the texts for herself, when she realized how he bragged about draining our account, her tone shifted. "That's not the brother I thought I knew," she confessed to a mutual friend. His mother called again, this time, her voice breaking. "He said such cruel things, Hannah. About your age, about replacing you. I raised him better than that." I listened quietly, offering no comfort. I wasn't cruel, but I was done carrying their guilt. His words were his alone. And finally, they were beginning to see him for who he truly was. Meanwhile, Mark was unraveling. He tried everything to claw back control. He claimed the boutique had been his idea. He said he had invested money in the early days. He even told people he had been my business partner all along. But every claim fell apart when met with my meticulous records. He had mocked as paranoid when I kept them. By the time his lawyer tried filing motions to seize part of the boutique, the judge barely entertained them. "Do you have documentation of contributions?" the judge asked. Mark's lawyer stammered. My lawyer slid across contracts, tax filings, bank ledgers, all signed by me alone. Case dismissed. The collapse wasn't just legal, it was personal. Melissa grew restless, living in her cramped studio, with a man who couldn't pay his own bills. The thrill of being the young mistress had soured into the reality of caring for a sulking, middle-aged man. Soon she left him posting online about learning from mistakes and choosing partners who build instead of destroy. Mark, once so smug, now bounced between his parents' house and cheap motels. His reputation at work suffered too. HR opened an investigation into his relationship with a subordinate. The promotion he had been counting on went to someone else. When he tried to claim age discrimination, HR simply added his complaint to his growing file of misconduct. The man who once mocked me for being careful was now drowning in the consequences of his recklessness. And yet I wasn't celebrating. I was working. My boutique thrived like never before. Customers lined up not only to shop, but to show support. Some shared their own stories of betrayal, of being underestimated. One woman confided as she purchased a handbag. "My ex tried the same thing. Thought he'd leave me with nothing. Men like that never expect us to be smarter than them." Her words stayed with me, because that was the truth. Mark had never expected me to think ahead, to plan to fight back without ever raising my voice. But let me ask you, if you were in my shoes, would you have confronted him earlier? Would you have shouted, thrown him out, tried to stop him? Or would you, like me, have prepared in silence and waited for the moment he exposed himself? I'd love to hear what you would have done. Leave your thoughts in the comments, because the way I see it, silence was my sharpest weapon. And now every careless move he made was another blade cutting into his own pride. Still, even I couldn't have predicted what came next. Mark wasn't finished humiliating himself. His next move would be so desperate, so foolish, it would erase any last shred of respect he might have clung to. And when it happened, I realized something chilling. Sometimes people don't just fall. They drag everyone around them into the pit they've dug. While Mark's life collapsed in slow motion, mine seemed to expand with a kind of energy I had never felt before. Each morning, when I unlocked the door to my boutique, I was greeted not only by the familiar scent of fabric and polished wood, but also by something new: solidarity. Women I had never met before began walking through my doors, not just as shoppers, but as supporters. Some of them had read whispers of my story on social media. Others came because they'd heard from a friend of a friend. They browsed the racks, nodded at my displays, and leaned in with quiet words. "We heard what he did. We just wanted you to know we're rooting for you." Often, they left with more than they had planned to buy. Sometimes a scarf, sometimes a handbag, sometimes just a token to show that they believed in me. The boutique had once been my private rebellion, the dream Mark dismissed as a little shop. Now it was becoming something far larger, a community hub, a symbol. Each sale was more than revenue. It was a message: you are not broken. Orders online surged too. My website traffic doubled, then tripled. Packages left the shop daily wrapped in the same silver paper I'd used on Mrs. Peterson's scarf the day Mark's text arrived. But now those packages carried more than products, they carried proof of survival. Meanwhile, Mark scrambled. Rumors floated back through acquaintances. He was staying with his parents again, muttering about how unfair the judge had been. Melissa had left him publicly airing grievances about his arrogance. His colleagues avoided him at work, the HR file thickening with each complaint. Even his sister Amanda, once quick to spread gossip, came into the boutique one afternoon. She touched a silk scarf, her voice low. "I know we didn't support you at first, but after everything, I'm ashamed I ever believed him." I nodded politely, but inside I felt something shift. His own family was beginning to see the truth. Not because I shouted, not because I fought, but because the evidence, the cold, undeniable truth, had silenced his lies. The irony wasn't lost on me. While he drowned in his own mistakes, I thrived. I hired 2 new employees, both young women eager to learn. I began hosting small evening events, wine tastings, trunk shows, networking nights. The boutique pulsed with energy, with laughter, with possibility. And yet I didn't gloat. Pride, yes, but not gloating. Because success wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about proving myself right. Late one night, as I reviewed sales figures, I thought about the lesson woven into every page of my ledger. Independence is not selfish. It is survival. Mark once accused me of being too cautious, of not trusting enough. But if caution builds protection, if preparation safeguards what you've built, then caution is power. I want to pause here, because this is important. If you've ever been underestimated, if someone has ever told you your dream was just a hobby, then you know how sharp that sting can feel. But here's what I learned. Every hour you invest, every record you keep, every boundary you set, is a seed of resilience. And when the storm comes, those seeds will be what keep you standing. That month business reached levels I had never imagined. My little shop was thriving, expanding, spilling over with opportunity. And every time I handed a customer her purchase, every time I logged another online order, I felt it. This was my story now. Not his betrayal, not his downfall, mine. But success has a way of drawing attention, and soon it wouldn't just be customers and friends watching me rise. I was about to be invited into a space I never thought I'd stand in, a stage, a microphone, a spotlight. My voice, once dismissed, was about to become something much larger. And as I prepared to step into that role, I realized Mark's betrayal had given me something unexpected, a platform. The first time I stood on a stage with a microphone in my hand, I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Months earlier, I was just a woman running a boutique, quietly collecting receipts and texts, preparing for a storm I knew was coming. Now I was being introduced as a guest speaker at a local women's business conference. The room was filled with faces, young entrepreneurs, small business owners, students. They were waiting for me not just to tell them about handbags or scarves, but to share how I had survived betrayal and built something stronger from it. I took a breath and began. My ex-husband once told me that my boutique was just a hobby. He laughed when I worked late nights, mocked me for separating my finances. He thought I was paranoid, but when he emptied our joint account and walked out, those same precautions were what saved me. And today, they're why I stand here with a thriving business that is mine alone. There was a hush in the room. Dozens of women leaned forward, eyes-sharp pens scratching across notebooks. They weren't just listening, they were seeing themselves in my story. I talked about preparation, about instincts, about how I had moved my savings, quietly documented everything, protected what was mine. And I told them the truth I had learned the hard way. Independence is not mistrust, it is insurance. And protection isn't paranoia, it's power. When I finished, the applause felt like a wave breaking over me. Afterwards, women approached me one by one. A college student with tears in her eyes said, "My boyfriend tells me I overthink." But hearing you today makes me feel like maybe I'm not crazy, another woman whispered. My ex tried to take my business too. Listening to you, I know I did the right thing by keeping records. I realized then that my story wasn't just mine anymore. It was a mirror for every woman who had been doubted, mocked, underestimated. And the irony Mark's betrayal, the very thing he thought would destroy me, was the reason I had this platform. He had tried to erase me, but in the process he gave me a louder voice than I ever imagined. Soon invitations multiplied. Podcasts, articles, magazines wanting to feature my boutique not as a shop, but as a story of resilience. My inbox filled with questions. How do you separate finances? How do you protect yourself in marriage? What advice would you give to women just starting out? I shared everything, because knowledge is armor, and I wanted them armored, prepared, never blindsided the way I had been. But even as I rose higher, I knew my story wasn't done. Mark hadn't finished making mistakes. He was still out there, still desperate, still grasping for any shred of control. And what he did next, well, it stunned even me. Because sometimes people don't just fail. They expose themselves so completely that even those closest to them can't deny the truth anymore. Before I tell you about that, let me leave you with this thought. Your story, no matter how painful, can become someone else's lifeline. If mine resonates with you, stay with me, subscribe, follow along. Because what's about to happen next will show you just how far desperation can drag a person down. That night after the conference, I returned home to my quiet house. I poured a glass of wine and looked around the living room. For so long I had thought of this place as a fortress. Now it felt like a stage of its own, not for drama, but for victory. The battle wasn't over, but my footing had never been more solid. And soon the world would see just how deep Mark's unraveling would go. The day Melissa walked into my boutique, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked smaller somehow, as though the weight of disillusionment had pressed down on her frame. She clutched her purse close to her chest like it was armor, her eyes darting nervously as if she expected me to throw her out the moment she crossed the threshold. I was arranging a new display of sunglasses when she approached. Her voice was low, trembling. Hannah, I owe you an apology. For a moment I simply studied her. This was the girl who had laughed too loudly at Mark's jokes during the Christmas party, the one who had touched his arm with false intimacy, the one who had boarded herself onto his midlife crisis fantasy. Now she stood before me, stripped of glamour, her confidence gone. I believed everything he told me, she confessed. He said you were cold, controlling, that you didn't support his dreams. I thought I was different. I thought he really loved me. But after everything that happened, I realized he was just using me too. Her words didn't surprise me. Mark had always painted himself the victim. That was his skill, twisting the truth until others saw him as the misunderstood man shackled to a woman who didn't understand him. Melissa had been young, eager to believe she was special, that she was rescuing him from a loveless marriage. But reality is a harsher teacher than any lecture. She sighed, her shoulders sagging. When you froze the accounts, he tried to move into my studio apartment. He said it would be temporary. But within 2 weeks, he complained about my closet, told me I should take out a loan for a bigger place. That's when I finally understood his dreams weren't about building anything. They were just escapes. I raised an eyebrow, half amused, half pitying. Let me guess. He had big plans, but no way to fund them. Melissa nodded, shame flashing across her face. Exactly. He kept talking about investments, paying off, promotions coming soon, cryptocurrency about to skyrocket. But it was all air, and when I couldn't carry his weight anymore, he turned on me too. Just like he turned on you. I didn't gloat. There was no need. She was already living the consequences. Instead, I folded my arms and said softly, "Those weren't dreams, Melissa. They were excuses." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, almost as if to prove her sincerity, she whispered, "I'm dating someone my own age now. We don't have much student loans, a small apartment, but at least it feels real. At least we're building together." I nodded. It wasn't my place to absolve her, but I could acknowledge her honesty. She had learned the same lesson I had, though, in a harsher way. A man who thrives on illusions will never build a future you can live in. When she left the boutique, I noticed something different in myself. I felt no bitterness, no lingering resentment, only clarity. Mark had tried to use her as a weapon against me, a trophy to prove his youth. But in the end, she had become another witness to his downfall. And if you're listening to this, I want to pause and ask you something. Have you ever trusted the wrong person only to discover the truth too late? And when you finally walked away, did you feel regret or relief? Share your story in the comments, because you might be surprised how many people have walked the same road. And if my story resonates, don't just listen, silently join this community. Hit subscribe, be part of the conversation. The irony struck me as I locked up the shop that evening. The very woman he had flaunted in my face was now another voice confirming his lies. He had underestimated me, underestimated her, underestimated everyone. And while his illusions crumbled, my life kept expanding stronger, brighter, steadier than ever before. But the story didn't end with Melissa's apology. Because as my business soared to new heights, as my name began to stand for resilience and preparation, Mark's life took yet another fall. And this time, it wasn't just about finances or relationships. It was about his legacy. 5 years after the text that was supposed to destroy me, I stood at the grand opening of my third boutique location. The air buzzed with conversation, glasses clinking, cameras flashing. Reporters mingled with customers, interviewing staff, asking questions about how a little shop had transformed into a thriving brand. I looked around the bright, polished space and felt something powerful rising in me. This wasn't just a store, it was a monument to survival. Every rack of clothing, every handbag on display, every glowing light fixture was proof that success is the sweetest revenge. Mark once sneered, "At least your little shop will keep you busy in your old age." That very text now hung framed in my office, right beneath my newest business award. His mockery had become my mantra. Meanwhile, word of his decline reached me in fragments. He had moved out of his parents' home only to rent a tiny apartment above someone's garage. His job had been downsized during company restructuring, and he was forced into a lower-paying role. His dating life was a string of failures. Women his own age had no interest, and younger women had already heard his reputation. He had become a cautionary tale, whispered in offices not a man admired. I, on the other hand, was expanding. My boutique chain now employed 30 people. We had been featured in national magazines. Young entrepreneurs came to me for advice. Some asked how to price inventory, others how to build customer loyalty. But the question that always came up was this: how do I protect what I'm building? I told them the truth. Separate your finances, document everything, trust your instincts. Independence isn't selfish, it's survival. They nodded wide-eyed, realizing that what I had lived through wasn't just a story of betrayal. It was a blueprint for resilience. The irony never left me. Mark had tried to humiliate me with that cruel text. He wanted to watch me crumble, to strip me of security and pride. Instead, he gave me the greatest gift, a reason to prove him wrong. I remember one particular night standing outside my second boutique after closing. The street was quiet, the glow of the store lights reflecting in the windows. I caught sight of my reflection, older, yes, but also stronger, steadier. I realized then that every scar, every insult, every betrayal had built the woman staring back at me. And that woman was unstoppable. Here's the truth, and I want you to hear it clearly. Success isn't just numbers in a bank account. It's the ability to rise when someone tries to bury you. It's proving to yourself, not to them, that you were always enough. Mark didn't just lose me, he lost everything he thought he controlled. His cruel laughter, his ha-ha, his smug certainty, all of it collapsed under the weight of his own arrogance. And I learned that sometimes the best response to cruelty is not shouting, not revenge in the traditional sense. It's simply living well, building, thriving, turning what was meant to end you into the very foundation of your empire. The night of the third boutique's grand opening, I stood before the crowd and raised a glass. To every woman who's been underestimated, to every dream dismissed as a hobby. May your success one day silence every voice that doubted you. The applause was thunderous. My heart swelled. This was more than a toast. It was a victory cry. But even in that moment of triumph, I knew there was one final chapter left to tell. The story wasn't over, not yet. Because 5 years after his cruel text, I was about to confront the truth face to face. And when it came, it wasn't anger I felt. It was something far deeper. 5 years after that text, the one that was supposed to shatter me, I found myself standing at the flagship location of my boutique chain. The store sparkled with soft lighting, polished wood, and rows of carefully curated designs. It wasn't just a shop anymore. It was the crown jewel of a small empire. Employees bustled with purpose. Customers laughed as they tried on handbags and dresses. And I stood there, calm and steady, the architect of it all. That was the day Mark showed up again. I had just finished speaking with a reporter when I saw him through the glass doors. His shoulders slumped, his clothes ill-fitting. He looked nothing like the man who had once mocked me with cruel confidence. Instead, he looked like someone who had been drained of every illusion he once held. When he walked in, the chatter of the boutique seemed to dim. He avoided eye contact with the employees, his gaze flicking nervously across the racks. Finally, he stopped in front of me. His voice was low, bitter. "You destroyed me." I tilted my head. "No, Mark. You destroyed yourself. I just made sure you couldn't take me down with you." He flinched at my words, but I wasn't finished. "You mocked my shop, drained our account, flaunted a girl young enough to be your daughter, and laughed while you did it. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences?" His face flushed shame, replacing the arrogance that had once lived there. His mother, who had accompanied him, stepped forward, her voice sharp. "That's enough, Mark. You've embarrassed yourself enough already." I watched as she guided him out his steps, dragging like a child being scolded. For the first time, I felt no anger, only a deep, quiet relief. Because here's the truth, the text message he thought was an ending had been my beginning. The cruel laughter at the end of his words, "Ha," had sparked a fire in me I didn't know I had. He thought he had taken everything. But really, he gave me the one thing I needed most: freedom. That evening, I closed the boutique and sat in my office. On the wall hung the framed screenshot of his text. Below it was another frame, this one holding my most recent award as a businesswoman. Together, they told the story better than words ever could. I thought about the journey, the late nights documenting receipts, the courtroom battles, the humiliation he faced at the airport the moment Melissa walked away. Each piece had led me here, stronger, wiser, independent. And here's the lesson I want you to take with you. Sometimes betrayal is the gift that pushes you to build a life you never imagined. Sometimes the cruelty meant to break you becomes the soil where you plant your strength. Mark still lived in the shadow of his mistakes. I thrived in the light of my resilience. That was the difference. That was the legacy. So when people ask me how I survived, how I turned a little shop into a chain of boutiques, I tell them this: I paid attention. I trusted my instincts. I refused to let someone else write the ending of my story. And maybe that's what you need to hear right now, too. If my journey has resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, I invite you to stay with me. Subscribe, follow along, and join me in the next chapter. Because there's another story I want to share, one that will show you just how far preparation and courage can take you. So, the cruel text was never the end. It was the spark. And every boutique I've built, every award on my wall, every life I've touched since has been the answer to his laughter. Success was my reply. And it was louder than any ha-ha he could ever send. Looking back now, I sometimes marvel at how a single text message changed the entire course of my life. It was cruel, careless, and meant to crush me. Yet it became the spark that pushed me toward everything I have today. In the quiet moments when the boutique closes, when the lights dim, when it's just me and the hum of silence, I think about the woman I was before that day. A wife who overlooked late nights, who ignored warning signs, who believed loyalty would be enough. And then I think about the woman I am now, independent, unapologetic, stronger not in spite of betrayal, but because of it. Mark's laughter in that message once echoed in my ears, sharp and mocking. Now it hangs framed in my office, nothing more than a relic of a past life. Beneath it are the symbols of my future awards, photographs of new store openings, thank you notes from women who say my story gave them courage. The irony isn't lost on me. He wanted to erase me, to replace me. Instead, he handed me a platform. His attempt to diminish me amplified my voice. His effort to take everything left me with more than I ever imagined. And that is the lesson I carry forward, the one I want you to remember. Sometimes the endings we fear the most are simply disguised beginnings. Sometimes what feels like destruction is the clearing of ground for something better. Today my boutiques thrive, my story inspires, my heart is whole. And his cruel haha has faded into nothing but background noise against the sound of my success. The best revenge was never about anger, it was about freedom. And freedom once found is a melody no one can silence.